Hey all, a while back I did a installation video for Tailwind CSS when it was just about version 1. It was actually still in beta at the moment, but I installed it and it was kind of just a walkthrough of what Tailwind is, how to install it, how to get it running on your system using a few pre-configured templates and so on and so forth. There's a lot of, I would say, loopholes to get through to get Tailwind in your actual app, but once you do, it's seamless and painless. I usually use it with Ruby on Rails particularly, but a lot of support is in the books for tons of other frameworks, whether you're just using static sites like maybe a gulp pre-processing or you're on Laravel. All these things, or Webpack of course, are possible. So what I want to do is just run through recently Tailwind version 1.2 has been released, and that has support for like CSS grid, CSS transitioning, a lot of cool things with that under the hood. Not necessarily going to walk through those, but I just want to install it because I did have requests of how to actually get this rolling in your own projects. And at the lowest level, I want to kind of reference this template that Adam Wathan created a while back. It's called Playground. I think I referenced it in this video too. So what I want to do is essentially download this. It's out of date in terms of how we can configure things, but essentially what we're going to do is start with this and then install Tailwind CSS version 1.2 and then kind of take a walk around what's under the hood. So let's do that first. I'm going to clone this repo and just kind of clone it down into a sites directory I have up already. So I'll just say git clone. So we have Playground. If I cd into Playground at the moment, cool. We could just run yarn essentially, but I want to open it up and see what's inside just to double check everything here. Now, since this is Adam's Git stuff, I'm actually going to delete that. So we'll have our own version of it. And he has this extensions helper for vscode that basically prompts you to do some Tailwind download stuff, but I don't really need that. So I'm going to delete it. I'm actually just going to get rid of that file. We'll do it from scratch. Post CSS, we'll actually keep this the way it is and then kind of go from there. At the root, it assumes at the root of your project, your file will be here. It's going to look for a tailwind.config.js file. That's going to be relative to the installation docs if you're used to these. That's a default. You can change the name if you want to, and just kind of reference it in another way. There's somewhere in the docs that tells you how to do that, I believe. Yeah, here you can init it with the actual file name, which we'll actually do. In the package.json file, there's some stuff here that comes pre-baked, which is why I'm using this. I didn't really want to go and reinvent the wheel. But essentially under the hood, we're going to use some post CSS to transpile the CSS that comes with Tailwind. And it's going to end up in a public folder that's going to be the Tailwind CSS itself. We can either keep that or delete it. I'll probably keep it just for now because we're going to actually import these directives, which are part of Tailwind, which you need. The base essentially resets the browser, does a number of other things to kind of reset everything to almost nothing. So you get the kind of same experience no matter what browser you use. Components are going to be essentially what is baked into Tailwind itself, and the same is for utilities. So those reusable classes that Tailwind's famously known for. So let's go into our package.json file again. We have Tailwind version from 1. I'm going to actually remove that for now. And the same is true. I mean, we don't need this stuff necessarily. It's more of a production environment. Forget that comma. But I'm going to save that down. And then we'll just add it from the command line like you might would to a normal project because I wanted you to get the actual experience. So from the installation screen, if we follow along on the actual documentation, we could say if you use npm, I prefer yarn personally. I don't know why. I guess it's maybe a little faster or appears faster. But if you add Tailwind CSS to the project, yeah, I'm going to just run yarn. There's no lock file found because we downloaded the repo. Adam probably didn't include the lock file because that's something you don't really version control. Okay, so now we have a lock file for the sake of running yarn initially. It's going to just kind of stick in what versions you have of things. If you're not really sure what this means, you can look at the yarn documentation. You would never really edit this directly. You can delete it, but that's about it. But what we want to do, since we don't have Tailwind yet, we can add it now. So I'll go ahead and do that. Yarn add Tailwind CSS. Try to increase the size of this for you. So we've added that, and our package.json file should update. You see it's 1.2 now, which is perfect. Anytime you do have an existing project, say you have Tailwind already in it, you could just say yarn upgrade Tailwind CSS. Basically, what I wanted to really download this for is so I don't have to type all these scripts. It's just a way to have all this stuff be like live reload and do the transpiling in real time thanks to PostCSS. And this isn't Webpack. This isn't anything special like that. So what I want to do now is just direct your attention to this file. This is where we're going to configure Tailwind. And essentially it's set up based on this template Adam already has. This purge CSS variable is actually only active in production environments. When your node environment is set to production, that'll actually go through your files based on what you pass, and then use some regex to find the CSS you essentially haven't used within Tailwind. So say you use only the red colors or something, but not the blue or purple or pink or whatever is included by default from the theme of Tailwind, which we still need to make. If that isn't there, then Purge CSS does a handy work of removing it, so your file size is way smaller, because on the surface, if you use everything that comes by default with Tailwind, it's quite heavy of a CSS file, like even more than Bootstrap, which is pretty crazy, and you don't need it all. So there's a few ways around that. Purge CSS is probably the easiest, but you could just go ahead and configure your config to be lighter from the start. So let's create that configuration file now. That's going to be the main things you're going to need in your app to get this running. We already have that. If you notice that at imports, these directives here, these are going to be necessary to actually include. Let me close this. Include your Tailwind CSS into the actual page. So they'll actually transpile down in real time once we have this going. But what that is doing is going to generate that CSS under the hood once we get it going. But let me show you this real quick. We're looking at the public CSS. There will be a build folder when we run, let's see, development or serve. So that, and production too. That's essentially what would happen once we fire that off, but we still need that configuration file. So we've got our post CSS config, which is necessary, but now we need the actual Tailwind configuration file. And here's where you can generate that. You can actually generate it from the command line. One trick I like to do is, I believe it's called full. So you pass this down, clear this out, then you pass -- full, and it creates a config file. Notice the name of this file doesn't really matter. This is the default. You can change it to whatever. If you wanted to run this, you can run full and then pass your own tailwind.config.js. I can't even type my name. But that would actually create the same thing. I won't go ahead and run that because I don't need to, but you could do that all the same. And it should set it up. But the -- full is a nicety because look into it, it's not blank and it comes with the default settings. But you notice what I said before, if you had just the red colors, okay, that's a few classes. Think of all the text classes, all those background classes and more that get these shades, and multiply it by each color you have here. You can see why that CSS file size gets huge. Clean this file up a bit, and I tend to do that, but I end up usually leveraging the purge CSS in the end because it does just save you a ton of time and bandwidth. There are some gimmicks with that though when it comes to creating your own components with Tailwind. I won't go into doing that, but it's essentially just combining these class names that get generated and creating a class for those. But by default, you'll see that version 2 has a few more classes and options in the bank. So we've got gap, grid template columns, grid column start, and the list goes on. I'm a flexbox person, but the grid is useful in a number of scenarios, and it just saves a ton of code typically. So it's nice to have that in my arsenal. I think I'll start using it more and more, but since 1.2 just released, I've only scratched the surface of it. On top of that grid support, we now have transform options in scaling and rotation, all these kind of nice animation stuff you might use with CSS is all in config now. And response support for responsiveness in those too, which is nice. So if you're not sure what this part is, it's basically saying at what state do you want to offer these groups of variants. So say the background color, for instance, if I want to change it on hover, you can pass that in. The same as focus, and if you want to change it, say on like the desktop view versus the mobile view, you pass responsive down. And that all changed. You can do, there's another one called group hover, I believe too. So that's another one you can add. Definitely check the documentation on that, but it's pretty straightforward. And then you can extend it, which I have in another video of adding your own plugins, which is essentially a way to kind of pre-bake your own components into Tailwind instead of creating a new CSS file and adding those somewhere else. It can all just kind of bundle together. So aside from that, that's essentially getting started with it. At this point, it's installed. We have the yarn initialized. It's in our package.json file. We've got our script set up to run. I definitely stole this from the template. Like I said, I didn't feel like typing it, but then we have these dependencies, which we definitely need, and then the dev dependencies we'll need just when we're doing things in the wild. So actually, I feel like this one should be a dependency. I'm not sure why it's dev, but you might move that if you want, because once it hits production is when you want to do it. And the config's all set up, so we should essentially be ready to just go ahead and say yarn serve. Let's try it. Okay, so here's the test project. Cool. So nothing too crazy, but if we go into our public, we have a new build file, and then we have all of our CSS based on what just transpiled through. So you see all these background colors and stuff like that. So pretty gnarly. You'll notice this file is super long, which is why it's so heavy. You definitely need to run it through that preprocessor. It's about 67,000 lines long, which is crazy. Like I said, that's essentially it for version 1.2. If you want to install it into your favorite framework, Adam has a few, not necessarily how-tos, but just kind of the patterns you might uphold to those. A lot of the times it's the same thing. With Webpack, it's probably the most confusing because, you know, Webpack. I hope that's helpful. Like I said, I use it in Rails most of the time, Ruby on Rails. And with Webpacker installed with Ruby on Rails, Tailwind's like almost simple setup for me. Maybe I'll do a video of just doing that in the future. I've done it in various other series, but singling that out might help some people. So that was a short one. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Maybe more Tailwind stuff to come soon. Tailwind did just release Tailwind UI, which is a nice new, basically for developers who want to be able to design stuff and make it look pretty good from the start, which is great. I don't know that I'm the customer in this scenario. I'm more of a designer from day one. But I do enjoy the fact that they're shipping this stuff and people are eating it up. So that's pretty cool. My concern might lie in the fact that sites that carry this UI around might start to look like, you know, when Bootstrap sites were popular, everything started looking the same. That's my concern with this, but we'll see what happens. So enough chit chat. I hope you enjoyed this. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them below and let me know what else you want to see on this channel. I would love to get your feedback. All right, peace.